The photograph was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that knocked the air from my lungs right there in the sterile cavern of Denver International Airport. There they were, my son Thomas and his wife Catherine, their children Noah and Sophie, all gathered around a polished oak table that gleamed under the light of a chandelier. They were raising wine glasses in a toast, their faces aglow with feigned warmth. A turkey, golden and perfect, sat center stage. A pie, not the one I had carried in a special protective case all the way from Charleston, was already sliced. But it was the caption Catherine had posted just 15 minutes ago that truly sealed it. Full house, full hearts, so much to be thankful for. Happy Thanksgiving, from our family to yours. My eyes scanned the image again, searching for a sign that this was a joke, a mistake. But there was no empty chair. No space saved for me. I was Clara Caldwell, a 78-year-old woman standing alone under the arrivals board at Gate B, holding a coat I no longer needed, a misplaced parcel with no recipient. The flight had landed an hour ago, and their hearts were already full. It wasn't a slow dawning horror. It was a brutal, instantaneous clarity. The overly cheerful phone call from Thomas 3 days prior. "Mom, you have to come for Thanksgiving. It just wouldn't be the same without you." The way he'd let me book my own expensive last-minute flight. Catherine's text when I'd landed, just landed, so excited. Followed by a string of heart emojis. A performance. All of it. The shock was too cold for tears. It froze them somewhere deep in my chest. I simply turned, my movement stiff and deliberate, pulled on my coat, and began to walk. I walked past the livery drivers holding signs with other people's names, past the tearful reunions and joyful embraces, past the entire ecosystem of human connection. And I walked out of the terminal and into the thin, biting Colorado air, my small rolling suitcase rattling obediently behind me. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew with a certainty that was both terrifying and liberating that I would not be waiting for them to remember me. The invitation had felt like a thaw after a long, lonely winter. My son didn't call often. When he did, it was usually a prelude to a request. A financial shortfall, a need for a co-signature, a last-minute babysitting crisis they assumed I could solve from 1,500 miles away. But this time, his voice had been coated in honey. "The kids miss you like crazy, Mom. Catherine and I were just saying, it's been too long. We want you here." That phrase, "we want you here," was a key I thought had been lost long ago. There is a profound difference between being needed and being wanted. I had been needed for decades. My checkbook was needed. My reliability was needed. But to be wanted felt like a luxury, a warmth I hadn't realized I was starving for. So I said yes. I'd used the emergency fund I'd kept since my husband Robert passed away. I'd even bought a new cashmere shawl, a soft gray that made me feel elegant, like I might belong in their perfect picture after all. I packed my antique silver pie server, the one my own mother had used, imagining myself slicing into the bourbon pecan pie I'd perfected over 40 years. It was a silly, sentimental gesture, but it felt important. I had packed every ounce of hope I had left. Now, that hope felt like a fool's currency. The walk from the airport felt endless, a pilgrimage away from a faith I no longer held. My sensible shoes, the ones I'd worn for comfort on the plane, weren't made for this kind of penance. The sky was a vast, indifferent gray, the mountains a hazy, bruised silhouette in the distance. Nearly a mile from the terminal, past a sprawling rental car complex, a flickering neon sign caught my eye. The Bluebird Diner. The B was burnt out, so it just read, Bluebird. Someone had taped construction paper turkeys to the windows. It looked forgotten and sad, and in that moment, I felt a kinship with it. The bell above the door jingled weakly. The diner smelled of stale coffee and fried onions. A handful of patrons were scattered in the worn vinyl booths, a trucker staring into a thick mug, a young couple speaking in hushed tones, an old man reading a newspaper. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile looked up from the counter. "Happy Thanksgiving, hun. Just one?" "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I slid into a booth by the window. The seat was cracked but warm. The table was clean. "Got a Thanksgiving special," she said, handing me a laminated menu. Turkey, stuffing, the works. And we got pumpkin pie. "Just the pie, please," I said. "And a cup of hot tea." While I waited, my phone buzzed on the table. A text from Thomas. "Mom, where are you?" "We're at the airport." "Did you miss your flight?" The lie was so audacious, so breathtakingly cruel, that a laugh escaped my lips. It was a sharp, bitter sound that turned the heads of the other patrons. I ignored them and let the phone buzz again without looking. The pie arrived. It was a simple, honest slice on a thick plate with a dollop of whipped cream from a can that leaned slightly to one side. The tea was strong and scalding. I took a bite. It wasn't the best pie I'd ever had, but it was the most important. I hadn't baked it out of obligation. I hadn't carried it across the country as a peace offering. It was just a slice of pie in a diner, bought for myself, by myself. It tasted like the first day of the rest of my life. I ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite. I didn't rush. I didn't scroll through my phone. I didn't wait for anyone to show up and tell me it was all a misunderstanding. They weren't coming. When the waitress brought the check, she asked, "Another slice to go?" I thought for a moment. "Yes," I said. "For later." She winked. "Best decision you'll make all day." She was right. I paid in cash, left a generous tip, and stepped back out into the cold. The nearest motel was the Crossroads Inn, a squat two-story building with peeling paint and a vacancy sign that flickered with weary persistence. The man at the front desk was watching a football game. He barely grunted as he slid a key card across the counter. Room 207. The room smelled of antiseptic and despair. But the heater worked, and the water in the shower was hot. I peeled off my travel clothes, which now felt like a costume from another life, and stood under the scalding spray until my skin was pink. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange and terrible calm settling over me. I wasn't a victim. I was a volunteer. I had been volunteering for this role for years, ignoring the signs, making excuses, accepting the crumbs of affection they tossed my way. I sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, wrapped in a threadbare towel, and finally looked at the other texts. "Catherine, Irene, please answer. We're so worried." Thomas, "Mom, this isn't funny. Just call us." Worried, that word again. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the inconvenience of my absence, the disruption to their carefully curated narrative of a happy family. The sudden, jarring, loose end. I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled a small notebook and a pen from my purse. The notebook was for grocery lists, appointments, reminders. Tonight, it was for something else. I wrote on a clean page, "A person who is wanted is not left waiting." I stared at the sentence, then underlined it twice. Then, I turned my phone off, crawled under the scratchy blanket, and slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that comes only after a great fever has broken. I woke to the brittle light of a Denver morning. The first thing I did was call the airline and book a flight home to Charleston for that evening. Then, I got dressed, putting on the same clean, pressed clothes I had traveled in. I was not going to let them reduce me to a woman who gave up. With hours to kill, I took a city bus downtown. The city felt alien and anonymous, which was a comfort. I found a small, quiet bookstore cafe, bought a cup of tea, and sat at a table by the window. I pulled out my notebook and began to make a list, not of my grievances, but of my contributions. I listed the down payment I'd given them for their house, a loan that was never discussed again. I listed the private school tuition for Noah I'd covered for 2 years when Catherine decided to get her master's degree. I listed the European vacation they'd taken last summer, funded by the early inheritance I'd foolishly given them, thinking it would bring them joy. The list went on for 3 pages, a quiet accounting of a decade of one-sided giving. It wasn't a list of generosity. It was an invoice for my own invisibility. Next to it, I made another list, a much shorter one. It was titled Lily. Lily was Thomas's daughter from his first marriage, my other granddaughter. She was 24, a resident nurse in Philadelphia, a girl with a fierce heart and an old soul. She was the one who called every Sunday just to chat, the one who sent me photos of her rescue dog, Barnaby, the one who remembered that my favorite flower was the gardenia. At a payphone in the bookstore, I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring. "Grandma, is everything okay? You sound far away." "I'm in Denver, sweetheart," I said. "Denver. I thought you were staying home for Thanksgiving. That was the original plan. Then it was a different plan. Now it's another one." I told her everything. The invitation, the flight, the airport, the photo, the diner. I told it plainly, without tears or drama, like a witness giving a statement. There was a long silence on the other end, filled only with the sound of her soft breathing. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with a rage that was profoundly comforting. "They left you there?" "Yes." "And posted a picture?" "Yes." "I'm so sorry, Grandma. I'm so sorry." "It's not your apology to give, darling. But thank you for hearing me." "What are you going to do?" "I'm flying home tonight. And then I'm going to make some changes." The flight back to Charleston was quiet. I had a window seat and watched the vast, dark expanse of the country slide by beneath me. I didn't feel grief. I didn't feel anger. I felt clear. As if a fog I had been living in for decades had finally lifted. My small house in Charleston greeted me with the familiar scent of salt air and jasmine. I had left a light on, and it glowed like a beacon in the humid darkness. I walked in, set down my suitcase, and hung my coat. I was home, but I was not the same woman who had left. The next morning, I was at my bank when the doors opened. I met with an account manager, a sharp, kind woman named Ms. Albright. "I would like to close a joint savings account I hold with my son, Thomas Caldwell," I said, "and I need to revoke his status as power of attorney on all my affairs, effective immediately." Ms. Albright didn't blink. She simply typed, printed, and pushed the forms across the desk for my signature. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name, the ink dark and decisive. From the bank, I went to see my lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a man who had handled my family's affairs for 30 years. He had helped Robert and me with our first mortgage, and later with Robert's will. "Clara, good to see you," he said, his expression warm but professional. "I need to amend my will, Daniel," I said, sitting in the leather chair opposite his desk. "Drastically." I laid out my wishes. The house, the investments, the life insurance policy, everything was to be placed in an ironclad trust. The sole beneficiary was to be my granddaughter, Lily. "And Thomas?" he asked gently, peering over his spectacles. "Thomas has received his inheritance in advance, piece by piece, over the last 10 years, I said. "He is to receive $1, to show he was not forgotten, but intentionally disinherited." Mr. Harrison made notes, his face impassive. When I was finished, he looked at me over his spectacles. "You are certain about this, Clara?" "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." The calls from Thomas and Catherine started that evening, after the bank transfer notifications must have hit. First confusion, then indignation, then outright fury. I let them all go to voicemail, listening to the messages later, not out of weakness, but as confirmation. They spoke of betrayal, of confusion, of what they were owed. They never once mentioned the airport. Lily arrived the following Saturday. She took the train down, stepping onto the platform with a worn backpack and eyes that found mine immediately. She hugged me tight, a real hug, the kind that says, "I am here, I see you." We spent the weekend talking, playing Scrabble, and cooking together in my sunny kitchen. She didn't press me for details about her father, she just let me be, her quiet presence a healing balm. "You know, I never liked Catherine," she confessed on Sunday morning over coffee. "She always smiled with her teeth, but never her eyes, like a doll." "I know what you mean," I said. Before she left, I gave her a small, wrapped box. Inside was a pair of my mother's pearl earrings. "These are for you," I said. "Not for some future date, for now." She cried then, and I held her hand. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, my dear." The final confrontation came a week later. Catherine showed up on my doorstep unannounced, dressed in an expensive suit that looked out of place in our quiet, humid neighborhood. Her face was a mask of practiced concern. "Irene," she said, using my formal name as if we were strangers. "We need to talk. Thomas is beside himself. This is tearing the family apart." "What family is that, Catherine?" I asked, remaining in the doorway, my hand on the screen door. "This isn't about money," she said, a lie so bald it was almost impressive. "It's about you shutting us out." "You're being cruel." "No," I said, a profound calm settling over me. "I'm simply balancing the books. You had a full house and full hearts. My absence didn't seem to diminish either. I'm just making that arrangement permanent." Her face, for the first time, lost its composure. Raw fury flashed in her eyes. "You will regret this." "No," I said softly, and I knew it was the truest thing I had ever said. "I regret not doing it sooner." I closed the door, not on her, not on my son, but on the version of myself who would have let her in, who would have apologized for her own pain just to keep the peace. That evening, I sat on my porch, a glass of wine in my hand, and watched the sun set over the marsh. The air was soft and warm. My phone was silent inside. The house was quiet, and I was not lonely. I was free. The calls eventually turned into a final, pleading one from Thomas. "Mom," he began, his voice thin. "I saw the paperwork from the lawyer." "I figured you would," I replied calmly. I don't understand. After everything." "Exactly," I interrupted softly. "After everything. The airport, the photo, the years of being an afterthought. That wasn't intentional." "No," I said. "It was worse. It was convenient. I was a convenience, Thomas, and my convenience is no longer a resource you can draw upon." "You're punishing us," he whispered. "No, I'm releasing myself from obligation, from old loyalties that only flowed in one direction, from the guilt I carried so long I forgot what lightness felt like." "We're still your family," he said, a last desperate grasp. "No, Thomas, I was your family. You haven't truly been mine in a very long time." With that, we ended. Not with shouting, but with a truth said quietly enough to echo for years. I hung up and stood at the window, watching a lone seabird glide against the twilight sky. If this story finds you waiting, at an airport, by a phone, or just in the quiet corners of your own life, for someone to see your worth, I'm telling you now, you can stop. Your value is not determined by their attention. Your life is not a supporting role in their story. You can walk out into the cold air, you can buy your own pie, and you can, with your own steady hand, sign your own Declaration of Independence. It is never, ever too late to come home to yourself.